Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. I'm so excited for today because we're taking a super close look at a world that's invisible to the naked eye. But trust me, it's bursting with activity.
It really is. We're talking about the amazing world of bacteria.
Exactly. And I know you're particularly interested in bacterial identification.
Always a fascinating topic.
Definitely. And you've even mentioned being curious about Bergey's Manual of Determinative Bacteriology. That's basically like the encyclopedia for identifying and classifying all these tiny organisms.
Oh, absolutely. That's the go-to resource for any microbiologist.
Yeah, I can imagine trying to wrap your head around the whole manual would be
A monumental undertaking.
a little overwhelming for a deep dive like this. But don't worry, we're going to focus on one of the most fundamental tools in the bacteriologist's toolkit.
We're going to break it down into something manageable.
Exactly. And that tool is the Gram stain and morphological flowchart.
This is where it all begins. The foundation.
It's like a treasure map.
I like that.
That helps us navigate the incredible diversity of bacteria and eventually leads us to pinpoint their identities.
Right. Before we even open up that massive Bergey's manual,
Yeah.
the flowchart gives us clues and a starting point.
So describe this flowchart for us.
Okay, so picture a big chart with two main branches.
Okay.
One for gram-positive bacteria and one for gram-negative bacteria.
Right, so we're already splitting them up.
Exactly. And then under each of those branches, we have further divisions based on their shape, their morphology.
So what kind of shapes are we talking about?
Well, you've got your round ones.
Like little balls.
Yeah, we call this cocci. Then you've got the rod-shaped ones, the bacilli. And then some bacteria are filamentous, meaning they're like long threads.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this visual organization helps make sense of things.
It really does. It's all about breaking it down into manageable categories.
So let's take a step back for a second because I know some of our listeners might be wondering, what's the big deal about this Gram stain? Can you explain how that works and why it's so important?
Sure. The Gram stain is like the first test you do in a microbiology lab.
Initial screening.
Yeah, exactly. And what it does is it takes advantage of differences in the bacteria's cell walls.
Ah, so that's what determines whether they end up on the purple team or the pink team.
Exactly. So in the Gram stain procedure, we use a series of dyes.
Okay.
And the gram-positive bacteria, those with a thick peptidoglycan layer in their cell walls, they hold on to this purple dye.
So they end up vibrantly purple.
They do. But gram-negative bacteria, they have a thinner peptidoglycan layer and an outer membrane.
So their structure is different.
Yeah, and because of that, they don't hold on to that purple dye.
So they need a little help to stand out under the microscope.
Exactly. So we use a counter stain that gives them a pink color.
Okay, so now we've got our two main groups.
Purple and pink, that's the basis of the Gram stain.
So we've done our Gram stain, we've got a good look at the shape under the microscope, and now we can use this flow chart to get a little closer to figuring out what kind of bacteria we're dealing with.
Right. And then we can use the more detailed descriptions in Bergey's manual to confirm.
Right, because the flow chart just gives us that initial starting point.
Exactly. It's a quick and visual way to narrow down the possibilities.
So let's take a tour through this flow chart, and maybe we can highlight a few interesting examples along the way.
Sounds good to me.
So let's start with the gram-positive cocci.
Okay, so some of the most famous gram-positive cocci are the ones that tend to arrange themselves in clusters.
Oh, like little bunches of grapes.
That's a great way to picture it. And one of the most well-known examples of this is Staphylococcus.
Ah, staph infections.
Exactly. Staphylococcus aureus is a common cause of skin infections, but some strains can cause more serious problems like pneumonia or bloodstream infections.
So even within this group of gram-positive cocci, there's a lot of diversity.
Oh, for sure. And then there are the gram-positive cocci that like to link up in chains.
Ooh, like little pearl necklaces.
I love that description. And the classic example here is Streptococcus.
The culprit behind strep throat.
Yes, and many other infections as well. But they're also part of our normal microbiota.
Right, they can be good guys or bad guys, depending on the situation.
The microbial world is full of these kinds of complexities.
Okay, so we've talked about the round ones. What about the rod-shaped guys, the gram-positive bacilli?
This is where we encounter the fascinating world of spore-forming bacteria.
Spores. Those are like little bacterial time capsules, right?
That's a great way to think about them. They're these incredibly resistant structures that allow certain bacteria to survive in really harsh conditions, like extreme temperatures, dryness, even radiation.
Wow, that's amazing. So what are some examples of these spore-forming bacteria?
Two of the most well-known are Bacillus and Clostridium.
Okay, and are those guys generally good or bad?
Well, it depends on the species. Some bacillus species are actually used in
Oh,
probiotics.
really? Helping to keep our gut healthy.
Exactly. But some Clostridium species, like Clostridium difficile, also known as C. diff, can cause serious infections, especially in people who've been taking antibiotics.
Right, because the antibiotics can wipe out the good bacteria,
Mhm.
allowing the bad guys to take over.
Exactly. And another gram-positive bacillus that deserves a mention is Listeria.
Oh, yeah. Listeria, that one's a bit of a troublemaker, right?
It can be, especially for pregnant women and people with weakened immune systems.
And I think it's often associated with contaminated food.
Yes, it can be found in things like deli meats, soft cheeses, unpasteurized milk.
So another good reminder to practice good food safety.
Always a good idea.
Okay, we've got our cocci, we've got our bacilli. Now, what about those long thread-like bacteria, the filamentous ones?
Ah, these often look a lot like fungi under the microscope.
So branching out and forming these long filaments.
Exactly. And a good example of this is actinomyces.
Actinomyces. What's interesting about them?
Well, they're actually part of our normal oral microbiota.
Living in our mouths.
Yep, along with a whole bunch of other bacteria.
So it's like a whole microscopic ecosystem in there.
It really is. But sometimes actinomyces can cause infections, especially if there's some kind of injury or damage to the tissues in the mouth.
Interesting. Okay, so we've explored the gram-positive side of the flowchart. Let's cross over to the gram-negative side.
Let's do it.
What kind of interesting characters are we going to meet over there?
Well, starting with the gram-negative cocci, one of the most important groups is Neisseria.
Neisseria. That name rings a bell.
That's because some species of Neisseria are responsible for some pretty serious infections.
Oh, like what?
Well, Neisseria meningitidis is a major cause of bacterial meningitis, which is an infection of the lining of the brain and spinal cord.
That sounds really serious.
It is.
Mhm.
And then there's Neisseria gonorrhea, which causes the sexually transmitted infection gonorrhea.
Okay, so these gram-negative cocci are not to be messed with.
Definitely not. But it's important to remember that not all bacteria are bad.
Right. Some of them are actually essential for our health.
Absolutely. But now let's venture into the diverse world of gram-negative bacilli.
Okay, I'm ready for it. What kind of variety are we talking about?
Well, we've got everything from the tiny Bacteroides fragilis.
I've heard of those.
They're one of the most abundant bacteria in our gut.
Part of our gut microbiome.
Exactly. And they play a really important role in breaking down complex carbohydrates.
Helping us digest our food.
Yes. And then we have some medium-sized players like Escherichia coli, better known as E. coli.
E. coli. That one gets a lot of attention, doesn't it?
It does. It's another common resident of our gut.
And most strains are harmless.
Right. But some can cause food poisoning.
So it's all about the strain.
Exactly. And then we've got some gram-negative bacilli that are known for their pleomorphism, meaning they can have different shapes depending on the environment.
Oh, so they're kind of shapeshifters.
They are, and a good example is Haemophilus influenza.
Now, I know influenza makes it sound like this causes the flu.
Right, but it doesn't.
It can cause other types of respiratory infections, though.
It can, especially in young children.
Okay, so that's a good reminder that bacterial names can sometimes be a little misleading.
They can, but that's why we have resources like Bergay's manual to help us make sense of it all.
Right, it gives us all the details we need to know. Okay, so we've got the shapeshifters. What else is there?
Well, then we have the curved and spiral-shaped gram-negative bacilli.
Ooh, I bet those guys are interesting.
They are. One of the most famous is Vibrio cholerae.
The bacterium that causes cholera.
That's right, a serious diarrheal disease that can be fatal if not treated.
Wow. Okay, and what about the spiral-shaped ones?
Ah, those are the spiraceae.
Sure, she has.
And a classic example is Treponema pallidum, the bacterium that causes syphilis.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground, from staph infections to cholera to syphilis. This flowchart has given us a glimpse into the incredible diversity of bacteria out there.
It really has. And remember, this is just the starting point.
Exactly. The flowchart gets us to the right neighborhood, but then Bergay's manual gives us the specific address.
That's a great analogy.
For example, the manual will tell us the exact shape of the bacterium, whether it has flagella, what kind of environment it likes to live in, and so much more.
It's like going from a basic map to a detailed satellite image.
Exactly. And all of this information is important for understanding how these bacteria function and how they interact with the world around them.
And that's ultimately what helps us develop strategies for treating infections, preventing disease, and even harnessing the power of bacteria for good.
So if any of you listeners out there are interested in delving deeper into the world of bacteria, I highly recommend checking out Bergay's manual.
It's an amazing resource. And I know it might seem daunting at first, but just remember, It's like any other journey. You take it one step at a time.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover a new bacterium and get to name it after yourself.
That would be quite an honor.
It would. Okay, so we've talked about the Gram stain, we've explored the morphological flowchart, and we've gotten a taste of the incredible diversity of bacteria out there.
We've seen the power of basic microbiology tools for unlocking the secrets of the microbial world.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does.
If we could categorize bacteria by their personalities instead of just their appearance, what would some of these categories be?
Ooh, that's a great question. We'd have the resilient survivors, the ones that can endure even the harshest conditions.
The stealthy pathogens, the ones that can evade our immune systems.
And of course, the helpful symbionts, the ones that work in harmony with our bodies.
It's amazing to think about the diverse characters inhabiting this invisible world.
Each with its own story to tell.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you a little glimpse into that world and sparked your curiosity to explore it further.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and who knows what incredible discoveries you might make.
Until next time, happy exploring.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.